Thanks for checking out the Clarinet Ninja Podcast. That music that you're hearing right now is my good friend, James Dandifer, Canadian jazz clarinetist. If you like what you hear, I'm going to leave some links to his music in the show notes, so you can check him out further if you want. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Molly Gebrian. She is a violist and neuroscientist. It's a real treat. She has written a book. It is called Learn Faster, Perform Better. And it is the most powerful book I've read when it comes to learning how to solve our problems when it comes to practicing. How is it that we get from day one of playing a piece to the best performance we can possibly give while learning to play our instrument and become a better musician all along the way? Well, there's a roadmap, and she has been kind enough to lay it out in a way that we can understand and apply without having to be a neuroscientist ourselves. In this first half of the conversation, Dr. Gebrian shows us how our brain works, the best ways to retain skills and information, and how to put things together in a general way, the things to think about when it comes to organizing and using a method in our practice to get the best results from ourselves. I also want to have one disclaimer for the people that are watching this on YouTube. I used a platform that didn't work very, very well. This is early on in my podcast career, and I used a platform that doesn't do what it says. Made some false promises. But you know where you won't get false promises? At the Clarinet Ninja Dojo. So please check out the dojo. If you want to learn how to play the clarinet, you're an adult, you're getting back into it, you're just starting, wherever you are, there's a place for you. And it's a wonderful place to learn where you're going to get everything that you were promised, which is a person who is insanely excited about helping you learn how to play the clarinet. So check it out. You're going to love it there if you want to learn how to play the clarinet better. And go ahead and check out clarinet.sound. That's where there's some good free stuff, good information, a very nice blog, if I do say so myself. Check it out. But first, let's talk to Dr. Molly Gebrian. So we're here with Dr. Molly Gebrian. How are you, Molly?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I want you to know that this book has been a part of the Clarinet Ninja Dojo community since I learned about it. When was the book actually written?
Well, I wrote it in 2021, but it only came out this past summer. It came out in July 2024.
So I'm not too far behind. So I have the book here. Learn Faster, Perform Better.
There you go.
This book has been one of the things. There's been two or three books in my life about music that I've read them and I've been completely blown away by what is inside. I've always been a practicer. I always tell people, I know what I'm saying is true, but I can't prove it. And I feel like this book proves everything, like seriously, everything that I've ever said. And which also is very validating for me, but it's also, it's
Right.
really great because this probably won't surprise you. You say it better than me. Like, this is very thoughtfully written. It's accessible.
Thank you.
It's so actionable. It's a special thing. What made you write the book? Like, where did this come from?
I went to Rice after NEC and I did my doctorate in viola, but I was back at a research institution. So I was able to take graduate level neuroscience classes while I was there. And I was also the assistant director on 2 interdisciplinary symposia on music and the brain. And as part of those, as like a promotional effort or whatever, the school asked me to teach some sort of informal lunchtime sessions about music and the brain, because I was doing this with one of the professors there. And that's when I learned, like, oh, wait, other people find this interesting too. And this is really fun to sort of share this. And so that's kind of how it started. And then, for the last 10 years, I've been a viola professor, but I've continued to write and make my YouTube videos and do presentations on the science of practicing, because I discovered that more people than just me find it interesting and valuable, which I guess should be surprising, but it kind of was. And people had been saying for years that I should write a book. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to write a book, but when in the world am I going to have time to write a book? Like, I'm a performing musician. I'm teaching all the time, right? It's a very time-consuming thing to do, to write a book. And then the pandemic happened. And I was like, oh, wait, if I'm ever going to write a book, like, this is the time, because I'm not performing. Right. And I could take a whole bunch of time off from practicing to write a book. So that's how it finally happened, thanks to the pandemic.
Well, that's how the Clarinet Ninja YouTube channel started. That's how the Clarinet Ninja Dojo started, was that, well, what are you going to do with the time? You got this time. And it's
right.
It's a really, really unique thing. And I didn't know anything about computers. I had always enjoyed teaching adults, which is who my program is for. then all of a sudden I found something I love doing, and I had no idea that I loved doing it. And if not for the pandemic,
Yeah,
I would have never known. So it's nice to take something that's pretty horrible and turn it into something pretty great. Yeah.
definitely.
So, and I've always been a practicer. Like I went to Arizona State University in the early '90s for a couple of years, and I was known as somebody who was always in the practice room. When I reflect on your book and the things that you suggest, the thing I love about this, it can really consolidate the amount of time it takes someone to learn to be a good practicer, because it's taken me forever to become a good practicer.
Right.
And it was,
Same.
it was a lot of things. I don't want to make this about me, but I do want to tell you my origin in terms of practicing and how a lot of
Yeah.
it came about. And I want you to sort of talk about how that fits in, because it does in some way, but you can tell me more than I know myself. When I was in 10th grade, I took chemistry from the chemistry teacher that nobody wanted because he was so weird and so hard. His class was hard, and nobody passed any of his tests. And the first day of class, he said, "I'm going to teach you how to think. You're doing it all wrong."
Hmm.
And he proceeded to go along and explain that if you sit in class, pay 100% attention, take far less notes than you normally take, and then after class, when you're waiting for the bus home, you just remember everything that happened in the class. You just, with no notes, no books, you just remember things. You remember where he stood, what he said, what he was wearing, everything that you could possibly pull in. And then you do it again later in the evening when you brush your teeth or you go to bed, whatever it is. And everything that you can recall without looking at any notes, without using any aids, is stuff that's going to go into your long-term memory and stay there. And it was going to
Yeah.
save a lot of time. And, and so I'm sitting there in 10th grade. I was a little bit of a nerd, but also I was very, very interested in people having thoughts that I'd never heard before. And this was one I never heard before.
Mm.
One of the things for me personally in talking to you that I'd like to get is an understanding of retaining knowledge versus retaining skills. And is there a difference in that?
Mm.
And how does that look in terms of this starting point, which is still a big, big influence on me and how I suggest people practice and how I practice myself.
Mm-hmm.
And to lead this into when I've read your book twice now, one of the things you say is it's not really how you sound at the end of your practice session. It's how you sound the first time you play it the next day. Did your practicing hold?
Yeah.
Was it effective? Is it something that's repeatable and is now part of how you play? With that sort of as a launching point, can you start talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're really lucky that you had a teacher like that, because he's exactly right that reviewing in your mind everything that you could remember from class and sort of recalling that from your own mind without looking at any aids, doing it, like you were saying, when you're waiting for the bus and then later in the evening, that's spaced recall. And that's been shown to be really powerful for retaining things long term. That's great. Everybody should have a teacher like that in high school that teaches them how to actually learn and study and retain information. In terms of practicing, yeah, I mean, all of us have this idea that the measure of whether we practice well is how we feel at the end of our practice session. And that makes a lot of sense, right? You've done all this practicing and you feel like, okay, I can play it. But the actual measure is when you come back the next day. And I think a lot of musicians are very used to the experience of feeling like they did great practicing and then coming back next day and having to redo all of it because, they've kind of taken 500 steps backwards and nothing really stuck. And I think a lot of musicians just assume, well, that's just the way it is. You just have to kind of redo it every day and eventually it's going to stick with you. But that's not the way it needs to be, right? If that's happening to you, that's a very strong indicator that you aren't doing effective practice, because it should stick with you day to day. And what you said about skills and knowledge, yes, skills and knowledge are different. The brain does treat them differently, but both of them benefit from within a practice day, let's say, rather than the way that I think most people practice, which is working on one thing for a big block of time, whatever that thing may be. And then, when they're done with that, they move on to the next thing. And it's just these chunks of thing A, thing B, thing C. But what's much better is if you work on one thing for a while, work on some other stuff, then come back to that first thing and recall it. Just like your chemistry teacher said, recall it when you're at the bus stop, right? And then later in the evening, recall it again. That's going to work much better with practicing because you're reminding your brain repeatedly throughout the day or throughout a practice session, and then it's going to stick with you a lot better.
The words that you used was the illusion of mastery. It was very, very powerful. Anybody that's tried to learn an instrument, really, it is an illusion at times, right? Where you get to the end of the day and
It
right?
is.
I played it 100 times in a row perfectly. That doesn't mean that much, really. When
That doesn't mean
right.
that much. Exactly. And it's not my word, actually. It's psychologist's word, but it's a very, very powerful illusion. It's even if you know that the illusion exists, it's a very powerful illusion. You're like, oh yeah, I have this. No, you don't, especially if you come back the next day and you feel like you have to redo
Well,
your work.
right. I mean, it's like the truth is what people want to hear sometimes, right? And for ourselves, right?
Right.
You know, yeah, I
Yeah.
want that to be true, so I believe it. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
so one of the things that came up this morning in the Clarinet Ninja Dojo was a very interesting thing. A student played something, was supposed to come in on beat 2 on some 16th notes, wasn't coming in on beat 2. And
Mm.
all I did was say, "Hey, could you be careful to come in on beat 2?" They became aware of the problem, and we've done a lot of work to get the skills to fix the problem, but he could immediately fix the problem. And that you talk in your book a little bit, or maybe a lot, the idea of we can't fix a mistake unless we actually know what it is that we're trying to do. And my question to you is, obviously that's a part of the role as a teacher, is to point out, hey, do this a little bit differently, do this a little better. But when looking at it, like particularly for my community, which is adult learners, how is it that they foster the ability to hear the mistake that they could easily fix on their own so that they can make more progress, and then I can tell them about something else?
Right. Great question. I think the most powerful way to do this is to record yourself, because when you're hearing yourself from the outside, it gives you much more awareness and much more clarity of what's going on. And people hate recording themselves, right? And I get it. There's a big cringe factor that you record yourself and you listen back and you're like, oh God, I sound like that. But you sound like that regardless of whether you know or not. And for me personally, I would rather know so I can fix it. But also those kind of things like, oh wow, I'm not coming in on beat 2 right. A lot of times people aren't aware of that when they're actually playing, but then they hear a recording and it's immediately obvious to them and then they can fix it, and then they don't need their teacher to give them that input, so they can fix a lot of things on their own. And what the teacher can then give in a lesson or whatever are things that they don't have any awareness of at all, even when they're listening to themselves from the outside.
Well, we were talking this morning about the complicated nature of hearing what you want to play ahead of time, which is what we should be doing, but then
Yep.
also
Yep.
evaluating what you just played, which is thinking forwards and
Yep.
backwards at the same time, which I find to be nearly impossible to do. When I was studying with Ricardo Morales, he was incredibly good at that thing, and
Mm.
I wonder, is that something that people can cultivate, the ability to self-assess as they're playing? And is there a way to do that that's
Yeah.
healthy in terms of how to play music?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right. Like when you're playing, you do need to be always thinking ahead, but also thinking. I like thinking backwards. I've never heard that before. I like that way of expressing it, that you reflect on what just happened. And I will also say that recording really hones that skill. I know for me personally, when I first started recording myself, there was a very large gap between what I thought I did and how I actually sounded. And that's where the cringe factor
Sure.
comes
Yeah.
in. And then over the years, the gap between how I think I sound and how I actually sound has gotten very small, to the point that when I record myself daily multiple times. I'm always, I'll work on something and then I'll record just a little bit, like 5-10 seconds of music, record it, listen back, self-assess. And I would say these days I'm rarely surprised by what I hear. Sometimes there's like little things that I didn't pick up on, but the recording process has helped me hear in real time and reflect and self-assess in real time much more accurately. I've also seen the same thing in my students who start recording themselves accurately. Their ability to know what it actually sounds like is far improved once they've been recording themselves regularly and listening back for a
Well,
while.
okay. So here's another question that I have. Like when I am in like in a recording session and you get that immediate feedback, they
Uh-huh.
play it and you hear yourself through the headphones. Okay, we'll take it again. And you do it
Mhm.
again. Like there's a very, very quick
Mhm.
feedback that is seems to play a
Mhm.
different role for me. One of the things I like to do is record myself at the end of my practice session, and I don't listen to it until the next day,
Mhm.
because then I'm able to hear
Mm.
myself without the bias of what I believed I sounded like in that moment. And the more space I can put in between that, the more I can hear myself as a student of myself versus
Mhm.
actually me. Because I oftentimes, when I listen to a recording after I just made it, I still believe what I thought I played more than what I actually did play. Do you find any of that to be true?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true, particularly if you're recording longer
Right.
segments, entire movements or entire pieces. So yeah, for me, when I record like something long, I will always, almost always, it's because of just time constraints. I will have to listen to it the next day because I don't have
Right.
time to listen to it in the moment. Most of the time when I'm recording myself, though, it's tiny little snippets, like 4 or 5 measures of music, just to hear back, like, am I bringing across what I want to musically? Am I in tune? Like that kind of thing. And that kind of thing I find really valuable to do in the moment. But longer things, yeah, it's really helpful to listen back later when you've kind of like forgotten what you did and you're not influenced by how you feel in the moment of playing it.
Years ago, I want to share this with you because this was super powerful. It's totally overkill. I was on tour. I went for like 3 months, and tour can be kind of a grueling place and it can be a hard place to practice. And so I invented this thing
Mhm.
where I would record myself practicing for an hour right when we got to the hotel on the day. I would talk to the future me, right? I would say, this is what I'm trying to
Mhm.
fix. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I want to do. I would always count myself off before I played, so the future me knew what tempo I meant to play. And then I wouldn't listen to it until I was on the bus the next day where there was plenty of time with nothing to do.
Hmm.
And I would
Mhm.
sit and
Mhm.
listen to myself practice for an hour and then do that every day. And I did that every day for 3 months. And it was overwhelming how impactful that was. Not sustainable in daily life, for sure, really. I mean, it's impractical, and it was a very special circumstance, but
Yeah.
it was really, really amazing, and I was very enamored with myself that I'd stuck with it for 3 months. It was a lot.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's a great thing to do. First of all, the talking out loud thing is something that I recommend people do all the time in practicing because it really helps clarify your thoughts. It really helps you like realize where you're not clear with what you want to do or that you have more clarity than you thought you did. So the talking out loud thing is great. And then I also advocate that people record themselves practicing and listen or watch back because you will learn so much about how you're using your time, how you're practicing, how you actually sound, how you're self-assessing in the moment. Just yeah, that's
Well,
amazing that you did
and
that.
the
That's
the
very
other
cool.
thing in your book that I found super insightful, and I think you're younger than me, but when I was a kid, we used to practice in front of the mirror because you couldn't really video record yourself practicing, and even audio was not
Right.
quite the same thing. But the idea that recording yourself practicing, you're not taking in any of the feedback in immediate time that is
Mhm.
influencing how you're going about it in that moment. The way that was
Right.
a very interesting thing. 'Cause I spent, I don't know how many hours in front of a full length mirror practicing the clarinet. Yeah.
Same. Same. I used to always practice looking in the mirror and to sort of assess in the
Right.
moment how things were going. And then I'd get on stage where I didn't have a mirror and, obviously it didn't work. And so, yeah, don't use a mirror. That immediate feedback is actually detrimental.
That's interesting. And I never heard anybody speak to that really,
Yeah.
that was a very, there's a lot of things in your book that I'd already thought and you proved, but then there was a bunch of
Mhm.
things that I'd never actually had the thought. And there's nothing I love more
Oh,
than
cool.
having a thought I've never had before. It's really fun.
Same.
uh,
I'm glad.
you talk at the end of the book, I think more than in the body of it. I it's very funny. The first time I read your book, I didn't look through the whole thing before I read it, and I did a very intense reverse outline of the book. And I was a little bit frustrated, not with you, maybe, that there's a reverse outline at the end of the book. I mean, there's an outline at the end of the book.
Uh-huh.
It was way better than what I'd written down, but it was very interesting for me to
That's
interact
funny.
with it in that way. I had a very, very intense practice journal habit when I was in college.
Mm.
And I found one of them the other day in a box, like from 1990 or something. It was a long,
Uh-huh.
long time ago. And
Yeah.
it was a very interesting thing. So I was logging how many hours I practiced, what I practiced, how it went, on and on and
Mhm.
on. And I think that that's something that the idea of having a piece of paper and a pencil and recording things, we don't really do that anymore. How do you suggest people get into a practice journal or logging what they're doing or having it written down? Because as you were talking about before, it's easy to sort of get lost and lose focus if you're practicing. Sometimes I would be hard pressed to say, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish right this second? In
Right.
good practicing, you should be able to say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish right now. Otherwise, what are we doing?
This
Right?
second. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, practice journals are something I talk to students a lot about because I think a lot of people have been told, "Oh, you should keep a practice journal." And people maybe will keep them for a little bit and then they'll stop keeping a practice journal, right? And they'll get out of that
Right.
habit. And what I have found is most of the time when people get out of the habit of practice using a practice journal is for two reasons. One, it was too time consuming. So it felt like they didn't have time to actually do it. And two, it didn't feel that helpful. So if something's time consuming and not helpful, like why would you stick with it? And so the way I definitely keep a practice journal, and the way that I do my journal is at the end of each practice session, I don't write down how much I don't write down how much I practiced. I don't write down what I did. I write down what needs work. Because at the end of a practice session, it's the most fresh in your mind,
Yes.
right? What isn't sounding good and what needs attention. And so I will make notes, and mine are filled with abbreviations. When I look back, I have all my old practice journals too. When I look back on them, I can't make heads or tails of most of what I wrote because it's just a quick note for myself to know, exactly what to do. But now, because I'm not practicing it, like I don't know anymore. But I find that a very quick and easy way. It takes me at most a minute at the end of my practicing to write down the stuff that I noticed. And then when I go to practice, the next time, either the next day or the next practice session or whatever, I have a list of exactly what my goals are going to be for my next practice session, and they're really specific. So I find that a much more sustainable way to keep a practice journal, that you are logging something that's useful and it's not time consuming. Could I log more? Sure, but I don't find it as helpful, and it would take too much time, and therefore it would make it hard to stick with.
I want to get a little bit to the specific practice strategies that you talk about, because they're all super powerful. I think in terms of my own experience with the things that I've done, which are super similar to what you talk about, I had to really get over the idea that it didn't feel like I was getting better. The perception of, I just played that 10 times in a row perfectly. Also, this idea of, what did you call it? A challenge point, right? I always, I always tell people, if you can play it 7 times out of 10 correctly, that's the tempo, or that's the place you should start from, right? So there's a challenge. It's not an overwhelming challenge, but it's also, if you can play it 10 times out of 10 correctly, then you're not, there's something, it's not working.
Right. You got it already.
Stop doing that.
You got it already. You're fine.
Right. When somebody is getting into refining their practice, what are like the first couple of your strategies that people find the most impactful to get going with, and then the most accessible?
Yeah, right. I would say, well, having a goal. The number of times I ask people, do you have a goal when you practice? And the answer is no. So that's often the first thing, is just having specific goals for your practice session. Is often really impactful, because people just go in and just start playing. Aside from that, I would say the 3 most impactful things for me personally, and what I've seen in my students and the people I work with, are the importance of taking breaks, interleaf practice, so constantly switching between what you're doing, and the importance of mental practice. I would say those are the 3 things that people typically aren't doing that make the biggest difference in terms of making progress, retention, the whole thing.
Could you go through what those in more depth, what those things are? So
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. I didn't want to just like talk at you.
Well, that's exactly what I want.
So okay, I will talk at you then. So let's start with taking breaks, because I think that's kind of a fundamental one. I think that in our culture broadly, but certainly music training culture, we tend to think that you should just practice as much as possible for as long as possible. That if you're, if you do, like, especially in conservatory, like, 3-hour blocks of time, practice as many hours as you can possibly fit into the day. If you're taking a break, it means you're lazy, all these sort of cultural messages around taking breaks. But the research is exceptionally clear that not only are breaks really important, but we make the most progress during breaks, which is very, very counterintuitive. But when you take a break, your brain continues to process what you were just practicing. Your brain has to do actual physical reconstruction on itself in order for you to get better at something. And your brain needs you to take a break to do that physical reconstruction. An analogy I use is road construction, right? If they have to fix the road, they can't have people driving on it while they're trying to repave it. Another analogy I've been using more recently, because I think a lot of people have an understanding of how strength training works. So when you are trying to get stronger, you don't actually get stronger while you're lifting weights or doing push-ups or whatever. You're creating micro tears in your muscles, which are then repaired when you're taking a rest day. And then when you come back, it's stronger. And I think that is something a lot of people understand, and because people understand the importance of rest days. It's exactly the same thing in your brain. You're not creating like micro tears in your brain. But it is the same thing, that you give your brain the input while you're practicing, but your brain actually does something with it when you're taking a break. So the importance of lots of breaks throughout a practice day, the importance of taking short little micro breaks, 10, 15 seconds long within a practice session, and just kind of spacing your practice out within a practice day. Take days and weeks off from things once you get good at them, and that will solidify them further rather than continuing to just like practice it to maintain it. Taking breaks is a real game changer for a lot of people. So that's the first big thing on the list. Connected to that is something called interleaved practice or random practice, which is essentially what I was talking about a little bit ago, where you practice one thing for a bit and then you go practice some other stuff and then you come back to that first thing, that you're constantly kind of switching back and forth between different things rather than practicing only one thing for a big block of time. That's beneficial for lots of reasons. One is then you have breaks built in, like we were just saying.
Right.
But when you're constantly switching like that, kind of like what your chemistry teacher taught you, that, when you come back to something repeatedly, your brain has to recall, wait, what is this thing that we're working on? How do I do this? And that reminder for your brain is really beneficial for actually solidifying it in your memory so that it sticks. Going back to the illusion of mastery, when you do something for a big block of time and you do it like repeatedly, it's a lot easier on your brain. And so you feel like, oh yeah, I got this. Like it feels really fluid. You feel like you have it. When you're constantly switching, it feels a lot less fluid. You come back to something you were working on 10 minutes ago and you're like, wait, what did I figure out with this? Oh yeah, right. And there's that kind of like cognitive friction that doesn't feel as good, but that friction is what you need. It helps it solidify in your memory when you have to kind of dredge it up again and remember how to do it. So interleaf practice really gets rid of that experience of having to redo all your work the next day and helps it stick better with you. And then third topic that I brought up was mental practice. Often people ask what I mean by mental practice. So what I mean by that is being able to hear and feel in your imagination everything you need to be aware of when you actually play. So all the sound-based things, pitch, quality of sound, dynamics, shaping, phrasing, all that sound stuff. And then all the physical aspects of playing, and being able to feel all the physical details. And you can fix stuff and you can improve stuff in your mind. Whatever you're working on, like, can you imagine it in your head? Can you feel yourself playing it correctly? Can you hear yourself playing it correctly? If the answer is no, you can fix it in your mind. You can really concentrate on wherever the issue is and try to feel it and hear it correctly, whatever the issue is. Once you can do that, it's often either solved or much better on the instrument. It kind of feels like magic. But if you don't have a clear mental representation of how you want something to be, how would you be able to do it, right? It doesn't, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Mental practice is really powerful for people. It really helps people clarify what they should be doing, how to do what they're doing. And because it's harder than doing it on the instrument, you were talking about the challenge point. It's right at your challenge point, which is where we do the most learning. And if you can sort it out in your mind, then you can sort it out on the instrument.
One of my best friends in the early 90s at Arizona State University, I don't know if he won the concerto competition or he came close to it, and he played his piece from memory. I never saw him practice it. Never saw him practice it. And it's like, hey man, how
That's
did you do that? He goes, well, I just thought about it when I rode my bike back and forth to school. And he was able to get access to, and he was a good enough clarinet player that was enough. He was actually a person that helped me form a lot of ideas in terms of how powerful it is to know what you want to play. And I also have a failed isn't the wrong word, not as successful as I would like ability to play jazz. And I studied it very hard and I really wanted to do it. It was one of those things I was good enough at. It wasn't embarrassing, but I also, when I would hear somebody really do it, I knew that wasn't me. So I stopped doing it, in a public way. But that was another thing that really clued me into the idea that you have to hear what you want to play before you play it. And we should be doing that with printed music.
Totally.
But sometimes we're not really taught in that fashion. Right. And that's where like, as far as I know, I imagine every European can sight sing everything perfectly because that's how they learn music there. Probably not true. But I would imagine, like the European training has more of that than we have in our, for all of a sudden you take sight singing class as a freshman in college and no one's ever asked you to do it before, as if that's some sort of skill you can just easily add. And then the other thing that was frustrating me was they don't tell you how to integrate that into your practicing and playing. It's a skill that you sort of develop in isolation. And then there's no talk about, okay, what do you do with this? Same thing with music history or music theory. Okay, you have this information, but let's actually put it into place. And that's something that you talked about in the book, is that these help us know where we are, right? These help us understand the music and frame the music in a way that we know where we are when we're playing a piece. It helps our recollection, helps all of our abilities. And that's something that I feel like if any music school wanted a note from me about what they should do, it's connect the disciplines a little bit better, or maybe a lot better. Because I feel like I had to do that all on my own when I was in school.
And I think you're right. I think that a lot of those academic classes that we take in music school are really disconnected from our lives as performers, and many people don't ever connect them up. In my first college teaching position, I was the viola professor at the school, but I also taught theory and oral skills. And I made a real point in my theory and oral skills classes to come at them from the perspective of a performer, because I was one. But, the students were too, so that they could really see, like, this is relevant to you. Like, this is how it informs your life. I'm always bringing that stuff into my private lessons also, because I think it's just so important. It helps you learn better. It helps you remember better. But I think you're absolutely right that theory, history, ear training, like, they feel very much in isolation the way they're often taught in music school. And it's to everyone's detriment, I think.
Yeah. That's something that I've always thought. So this is how I say it. Tell me your words on this. Sometimes what I tell students is you can play that, you just don't know it yet, right? Now, I can't remember the words that you used. I was reminded of this. This is because I actually say this a lot, because a lot of times, people can play it, but then when it comes time to actually play it, this I think goes back to like being able to play it the first time or in a performance situation. Do they know it well enough? Are they really ready to go? Is there any way that you can help us understand what it feels like to make the jump from being able to play it, like I can do this, versus actually being able to execute it when the time comes? Is there a way?
When the time comes, that's a great point. I mean, the way to make that jump is interleaved practice. But that was a distinction that I really did not understand when I was a student, that I thought that just because I could do something, that automatically meant I could perform it. And that's clearly not the case. But it would make me very frustrated. Like, I can do this. Why, when I get up to play in studio class or my recital, do things like go wrong on me? The solution, again, is the interleaved practice. And in the book, I talk a lot about methods of using interleaved practice to test performance readiness. Because it's one thing to be able to do something 10 times in a row, like you were saying, or in the privacy of your practice room. It's another thing to do things on the first try, at the drop of a hat, in a high pressure situation, right? It's just a different skill for your brain. It's a more difficult skill for your brain, and it's a skill, so you have to work on it. If you haven't worked on that skill of just being able to do it and know what you need to think, know what you need to remember, like, of course it's not going to be there. And so, interleaved practice, I find, has been a real game changer for me in that regard too.
That's the first half of the conversation with Dr. Molly Gebrian. Check out the second half on the next podcast, where we're going to learn so much more about how to apply these ideas and how to make them a part of what we do every day to get the most out of our practice time. And don't forget to check out the gentleman that's bringing us out, Mr. James Danderfer. I've got links to him in the show notes, as well as the Clarinet Ninja Dojo and all the things that it has to offer you as somebody who is trying to learn how to play the clarinet as a grown-up, because we do it a little differently at the Clarinet Ninja Dojo. It's tailored specifically to adults that are just starting, coming back after a long layoff, or if you've been playing a long time and you've really honed your skills and you want to up your level a little bit more, there's something there for you. clarinet.ninja.com. Check out links right to the Clarinet Ninja Dojo down in the show notes. And don't forget to rate us and review us. Give us 5 stars, would you? Come on.